Metta is not loving kindness. Here's what the Buddha actually taught. You may have heard it translated as loving kindness, 2 words, both slightly wrong. The Pali word is metta, and the translation Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu gives it, after decades of working with the original language, is 1 word, goodwill. Not love, not kindness, goodwill. And the distance between loving kindness and goodwill, that small shift in language, is the distance between a practice that asks you to feel something and a practice that trains what your mind does with every being it encounters. This matters more than it sounds. If metta is a feeling, then some people will have it naturally, others will have to force it, and many will quietly feel like failures because they cannot generate the required warmth for their ex-partner, or the colleague who took credit for their work, or the family member who left without explanation. If metta is a feeling, then on a bad day, a tired day, a day when you feel no love for anyone at all, the practice is closed to you. You have failed before you began. But if metta is goodwill, a determination, an orientation, a choice, then it is trainable. It does not depend on your emotional state. It is something you can do on the worst day of your life. Something you can practice when you are angry, when you are grieving, when the person sitting across from you has just said something unforgivable. The practice does not wait for you to feel ready. It asks only that you choose. Ṭhānissaro puts it plainly. It's not necessary to have the warm feeling, as long as you think about other people's well-being and take that into consideration as you plan your actions. That sentence changes what this practice is. It changes who can do it and when. It moves metta from the heart, where it is vulnerable to mood, to exhaustion, to betrayal, into the mind, where it becomes a skill with a specific structure, a specific method, and, according to the canon, 11 specific benefits, the last of which comes with a qualifier that most teachers leave out. But before we get to the practice, we need to understand what the Buddha was actually teaching and what he was not teaching. Because the most popular version of metta in the West, the one with the phrases, the warm glow, the visualization of light flowing outward from your heart, is built on a translation that may have gotten the most important word wrong. And when you get the word wrong, you get the practice wrong. And when you get the practice wrong, you end up doing something the Buddha never asked you to do and missing the thing he actually did. Act 1. What metta is not. The Pali language has 2 words that English collapses into one. The first is pema. This is ordinary love, the love between parent and child, between partners, between friends. It appears throughout the canon. The Buddha had no objection to its existence. He understood its warmth, but he had serious reservations about making it universal, about asking anyone to extend that kind of attachment to every being in existence. The second is metta. It comes from a different root entirely, mitta, meaning friend, not the friend who shares your history, your meals, your grief, the friend who wishes you well regardless of history. The Buddha recommended developing universal metta. He never recommended developing universal pema, and Ṭhānissaro explains why in terms that are hard to argue with. Love can easily lead to hatred when the people you love are ill-treated by others. AN 10:165. This is worth sitting with. Ordinary love, pema, creates what Ṭhānissaro calls a fourfold entanglement. You love someone. Now someone is good to that person, and you feel warmth toward them too. Someone harms that person, and you hate the one who did it. Now reverse it. You dislike someone. Someone harms that person, and part of you, however small, is satisfied. Someone helps that person, and part of you, despite yourself, resents it. 4 tracks, all automatic, all running beneath your conscious awareness, shaping how you respond to people you have never met, based entirely on their relationship to the people you have decided to love. And notice, this is not a moral failing. This is what love does by its nature. It draws a circle. Inside, those who matter. Outside, those who are irrelevant or worse. Every act of pema, every warm bond, every fierce loyalty simultaneously creates its shadow. Someone who falls outside the circle. A parent who loves their child fiercely will struggle to feel anything for the child who bullied them. A partner who adores their spouse will find it nearly impossible to wish well to the person who broke that marriage apart. This is not a bug in love. It is how love operates. Love builds partiality. It sorts the world into those who matter and those who do not. And partiality is exactly what metta is designed to dissolve. So if metta is not love, what is it wishing for? What does universal goodwill actually want? The canon gives an explicit formula. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the standard expression of metta goes like this. May these beings, free from animosity, free from oppression, and free from trouble, look after themselves with ease. AN 10:165. Read that last phrase again. Look after themselves. With ease. You are not saying, I will take care of you. You are not saying, I will be there for you, that I will hold your hand, that I will carry your burden. You are not promising intimacy or nurture or protection. You are wishing them the happiness of self-reliance, the capacity to find well-being on their own terms, without depending on you or anyone else to provide it. Ṭhānissaro's formulation is precise. You're hoping that all beings will wise up about how to find happiness and be there for themselves. This is not cold. It is the opposite of cold. Think about what you are actually wishing when you say, may you learn to look after yourself with ease. You are wishing them wisdom. You are wishing them the end of suffering, not by your intervention, but by their own understanding. You are wishing them exactly what the Buddha wished for his students, not dependence on a teacher, not comfort within a tradition, the ability to see clearly for themselves what leads to suffering and what leads to its end. And this is why Ṭhānissaro insists on the word goodwill rather than love. Goodwill respects the independence of the other being. It does not colonize. It does not hover. It does not need you to be present, to be thanked, to be acknowledged. It simply wishes well, and then, quietly and completely, lets go. And there is a practical reason the distinction matters, one that becomes obvious the moment you try to extend love to every being in the cosmos. Ṭhānissaro points out that if you define metta as loving kindness, as a desire to cherish and nurture all beings, you run into a problem almost immediately. When you really stop to think about all the beings in the cosmos, there are a lot of them who would react to your loving kindness with suspicion and fear. Rather than wanting your love, they would rather be left alone. A snake does not want your embrace. A wounded animal does not want your tenderness. A stranger on the subway does not want you projecting warmth and intimacy at them. What they want, if we project any wish onto them at all, is to be free from danger and to find well-being on their own terms. Goodwill can offer that. Love cannot, because love needs proximity, and proximity is not always welcome. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do for another being is to leave them completely alone while still wishing them well. There is another quality that separates metta from pema, and this one may be the most important for a practice that is meant to last a lifetime, not just a meditation session. Metta can live with equanimity. Love cannot. It is hard to be equanimous about someone you love, especially when they are being mistreated by others, or when they simply age, grow ill, and die. The mother watching her child suffer cannot maintain equanimity, and no one would ask her to. That is the nature of pema. But goodwill can survive death. It can survive separation. It can survive distance, silence, the passage of decades. It can survive the fact that the person you wish well may never know you wished it, may never change, may never wise up at all. You can wish someone well who will never hear you. You can wish someone well who has already died. You can wish well to a stranger on the other side of the world whose name you will never learn. Because goodwill does not require a result. It does not require proximity, reciprocity, or even awareness from the other person. It requires only the orientation of your mind, and that orientation is entirely within your control. Now, the Western understanding of metta has accumulated a set of assumptions that the canon does not support. Ṭhānissaro identifies 7 common misunderstandings about the brahmavihārās, the 4 sublime attitudes of which metta is the first. 2 of these deserve special attention here. The 4th misunderstanding, that the brahmavihārās are innate in the human heart. That somewhere beneath the anger and the fear and the selfishness, there is a natural reservoir of loving kindness waiting to be uncovered. That your job is simply to remove the obstacles and let the goodness flow. The Buddha never said this. Ṭhānissaro is direct. The Buddha never attributed an innate nature of any kind to the heart, good or bad. Metta is not something you uncover. It is something you build, deliberately, through training, through repetition, through the decision made again and again to orient the mind in a direction it does not always want to go. The mind is not a treasure chest with goodwill hidden inside, waiting for the right meditation technique to pry it open. It is a field, and what grows there depends entirely on what you plant and how consistently you tend it. If you plant anger, anger grows. If you plant indifference, indifference grows. If you plant goodwill, genuinely, repeatedly, even when it feels forced, goodwill grows. The practice is agriculture, not archaeology. The 6th misunderstanding, that the brahmavihārās are purely heart qualities, needing no analytical mind. That metta is all feeling and no thinking. That analysis gets in the way of genuine warmth. The canon disagrees. The practice requires discernment, the ability to distinguish goodwill from attachment, compassion from pity, equanimity from indifference. These are not the same emotions wearing different labels. They are fundamentally different orientations of the mind, and confusing them has real consequences. Attachment disguised as compassion leads to burnout. Sentimentality disguised as metta leads to collapse when reality refuses to cooperate with your feelings. Without the analytical mind engaged, without clear seeing, metta degenerates into sentimentality. And sentimentality, as anyone who has tried to maintain it through a real crisis knows, collapses under pressure. It cannot hold when the person you are trying to love betrays you, or when the cause you are trying to support turns out to be flawed. Goodwill, grounded in understanding, can. This brings us to the oldest surviving teaching on metta in the Pali Canon, the Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta, SN 1:8, and it begins in a place that may surprise you. It does not begin with yourself. It does not begin with those you love. It does not begin with someone whose face makes you smile. It begins with all beings, without exception, without selection, without filter. Whatever beings there may be, weak or strong, without exception, long, large, middling, short, subtle, gross, seen and unseen, living near and far away, born or seeking birth. May all beings be happy at heart, not some beings, not beings who deserve it, not beings who have earned your goodwill or demonstrated that they will use it wisely, all of them. And notice the categories. They are not organized by your relationship to them, not by friend, family, stranger, enemy. They are organized by what they are, weak or strong, seen or unseen, near or far, born or seeking birth. The sutta treats every being as equally eligible for your goodwill. There is no relational filter, no sorting algorithm, no hierarchy of worthiness. The practice is not generating love for each being individually, picturing their face, feeling warmth, moving to the next. It is orienting the entire direction of the mind toward the well-being of all, at once, without sorting, like turning a lamp so that its light falls everywhere in the room, not pointing a flashlight at one face after another. The flashlight approach, the one most Western practitioners learn first, is useful, but it is not what the Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta describes. The sutta describes a lamp, a mind that radiates goodwill in every direction, not because it has examined each being and found them worthy, but because that is the direction it has been trained to face. And here is the instruction most people miss. The sutta continues, "Let no one deceive another or despise anyone anywhere, or through anger or resistance perception wish for another to suffer." Metta is not only the active presence of goodwill, it is the active absence of ill will, deliberately maintained, consciously sustained against every temptation to make exceptions, against every voice in your mind that says, "But they deserve my anger, but they brought it on themselves, but I have a right to despise them." The sutta does not argue with these voices. It simply instructs, do not wish for another to suffer, not some others, not most others, another, anyone, anywhere. The oldest teaching on metta does not begin where most teachers begin today. It does not ask you to picture a face. It does not ask you to generate a feeling. It asks you to orient your mind, the entirety of it, toward the well-being of all beings, without exception. And understanding why the practice changed, understanding what was added later, and by whom, and for what purpose, changes how you approach the practice itself. Act 2. The practice. Canonical and commentarial. The method the Buddha taught is not the method most people learn. If you have ever sat in a meditation class and been told to picture someone you love, to feel warmth in your chest, and to slowly expand that warmth outward, first to a friend, then to a stranger, then to someone difficult, you have been taught a version of metta practice that is roughly 1,500 years newer than the original. The method in the suttas is directional. The meditator pervades the first direction, the east, with an awareness imbued with goodwill, then the second direction, then the third, then the fourth, then above, then below, then all around. The entire cosmos, in its entirety, pervaded with goodwill, abundant, enlarged, immeasurable, without hostility, without ill will. MN 7. Notice what is absent. There is no sequence of persons, no loved one first, no enemy last, no visualization of faces or imagined conversations. The canonical method is spatial, not relational. You are not directing goodwill at specific people. You are saturating awareness itself with goodwill and then extending it in every direction. The way a fire radiates heat, not toward any particular object, but in every direction simply because that is what fire does. This is the method that appears in over a dozen suttas across the Pali canon. It is the method the Buddha describes in the Vatupama Sutta, MN7, in the Samannaphala Sutta, DN2, and in every standard description of brahmavihāra practice throughout the Nikayas. It is consistent, it is clear, and it is almost never what gets taught in Western meditation classes. The reason it is rarely taught is that it is hard to package. A guided meditation that says, "Pervade the East with goodwill," does not give the student much to hold on to. There is no face, no story, no emotional trigger, just awareness extending outward, imbued with a quality the meditator may not yet fully understand. It requires a kind of mental stamina, the ability to hold a quality of mind steady while extending it across space, that most beginners have not yet developed. So teachers, quite reasonably, looked for a method that gave students something concrete to work with. What gets taught instead is a graduated sequence. You begin with yourself. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. Then you move to someone you love. May they be happy. May they be safe. Then a neutral person. Then a difficult person. Then all beings, step by step, face by face, expanding the circle outward. This sequence is useful. It works for many people. And it is important to know where it comes from. It comes from Buddhaghosa's Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, written in the 5th century of the Common Era, roughly 1,000 years after the Buddha's death. Buddhaghosa was a brilliant systematizer. He took the scattered teachings of the suttas and organized them into a comprehensive manual of practice. His graduated sequence, self, then revered person, then dear person, then neutral person, then hostile person, became the standard method taught across the Theravada world and eventually the method that traveled west. But even Buddhaghosa acknowledged something that most modern teachers do not mention. He identified 3 canonical sources for metta practice, and he noted that none of them include cultivating metta toward oneself as a first step. He justified the practice by inference, drawing on the Mallika Sutta, SN 3:8, where Queen Mallika tells King Pasenadi that she finds no one dearer to herself than herself, and the Buddha affirms that this is true for all beings. From this, Buddhaghosa reasoned, since you already wish yourself well, start there and extend outward. The reasoning is practical. It makes pedagogical sense. And many skilled teachers, including Ṭhānissaro himself, use a graduated approach. Ṭhānissaro attributes it clearly to the commentaries, not the suttas. His practical note is flexible. In some cases, that person may be yourself. In other cases, it may be somebody else. The point is not rigid sequence. The point is finding an entry that allows goodwill to gain traction in your mind. We mention this not to dismiss the graduated approach. We mention it because honest teaching matters. When you sit down to practice metta and a teacher says, "The Buddha taught us to begin with ourselves," that is not quite accurate. The Buddha taught directional radiation. Buddhaghosa, 1,000 years later, taught the graduated sequence. Both are valid approaches to developing the same quality, but they are not the same thing, and knowing the difference gives you more freedom in your practice, not less. If beginning with yourself feels natural, begin there. If it does not, if self-directed goodwill feels forced or narcissistic or impossible today, you are not failing the practice. You are not broken. You can begin with the East. You can begin with all beings at once, as the Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta actually instructs. You can begin wherever goodwill catches and holds. The canonical method does not require you to master self-love before you can wish others well. It simply asks you to orient the mind, in whatever direction it will go, toward the well-being of beings. Now, there is a reason the graduated approach became dominant, and it has to do with a category of person that the suttas never name, but that Buddhaghosa identified with devastating precision: the neutral being, not your friend, not your enemy, the person your mind registers as irrelevant, the stranger you pass every day on the way to work, the cashier whose face you have already forgotten by the time you reach your car, the name on a list that means nothing. A human being with a full life, with fears and hopes and a history as complex as yours, whom your mind has decided simply does not exist. This category, what Buddhaghosa called the Majjhata Puggala, comes from the commentary, not the earliest suttas. But the insight it contains is among the most piercing in the entire tradition of Buddhist practice. Because the neutral being is harder than the enemy, this claim sounds counterintuitive. Surely the person who harmed you, the one who betrayed your trust, who lied to your face, who took something you cannot get back, surely that person is the hardest to include in your goodwill. And in one sense, that is true. The emotional resistance is greatest there. The mind screams loudest against extending goodwill to someone who does not deserve it. But the enemy at least has your attention. You think about them. You replay conversations. You construct arguments you will never deliver. The enemy occupies space in your mind. Enormous space, sometimes more than the people you love. There is energy there. Distorted, painful, destructive energy. But energy nonetheless. And energy can be redirected. The practice of extending metta to a difficult person is the practice of redirecting that energy. It is difficult, but it has something to work with. The neutral being offers nothing, no energy, no resistance, no engagement at all. The mind simply slides past them the way your eye slides past a lamppost. They are furniture. They are background. They are, and this is the cruelest word the mind can apply to a living being, irrelevant. And this is where metta stops being a sentiment and becomes a skill. Because including the neutral being, genuinely, not as a checkbox, not as a step you rush through to get to the dramatic work of forgiving your enemy, requires you to override one of the deepest habits of the human mind. The habit of sorting beings into those who matter and those who do not. The habit that pema reinforces with every bond it forms. The habit that goodwill is specifically designed to break. When you can look at the stranger in the waiting room, the one you will never see again, whose name you will never know, whose existence makes no difference whatsoever to your life, and genuinely orient your mind toward their well-being, you have done something that no amount of warm feeling toward your loved ones can accomplish. You have broken the circle. You have extended goodwill beyond the boundary of relevance. And that, not the warm glow, not the visualization, not the phrases, is what the Buddha was pointing toward when he said, all beings, without exception. The canon lists 11 benefits of this practice when it is fully developed. They appear in the Ṭhānissaro Sutta, AN 1116. One sleeps easily. One wakes easily. One dreams no evil dreams. One is dear to human beings. One is dear to non-human beings. The devas protect one. Neither fire, poison, nor weapons can touch one. One's mind gains concentration quickly. One's complexion is bright. one dies unconfused. Notice what this list contains. Practical benefits: sleep, concentration, a clear complexion. Social benefits: being dear to others. And one benefit that speaks directly to the deepest fear of the audience, most likely watching this video. One dies unconfused. Not, one does not die. The Buddha never promised that. But a mind saturated with goodwill, a mind that is trained over years to orient toward the well-being of all beings, meets death without confusion, without the panic of unfinished resentments, without the weight of people you never forgave and people who never forgave you. And the 11th benefit: if penetrating no higher, one is headed for a Brahma world. That qualifier, if penetrating no higher, is the most important phrase in the list. The Buddha was clear: metta practice alone, without insight, leads to rebirth in the Brahma worlds, exalted, luminous, immeasurably long-lived, but not free, not liberated, not beyond the cycle of birth and death. The Brahma worlds are the highest reward of goodwill without wisdom. Full liberation, the ending of suffering, requires both. Metta opens the heart, insight opens the eyes, and only when both are open does the path reach its end. We have seen what metta is. We have seen how it is practiced, both the canonical method the Buddha taught and the graduated approach that came later. We have seen the neutral being, the one your mind decided does not exist, and why including them is the truest test of whether your goodwill has become genuine or remains merely decorative. But there is one more test, and it is the one most people dread, not the stranger your mind ignores, the person your mind cannot forget, the one who harmed you. And here, the Buddha did not say, "This will be easy." He said, "This is where your freedom is." Act 3. The difficult person. The instruction to extend metta to those who have harmed you is the most counterintuitive moment in the entire practice. Most people hear it and think, the Buddha is asking me to pretend, to sit with my eyes closed and smile at the person who broke my trust, who lied to me, who took something I cannot get back, and to whisper, "I wish you well." And everything in them rebels, not because they are bad practitioners, because they are honest, and honest people do not pretend to feel what they do not feel. But that is precisely why the distinction between loving kindness and goodwill matters most here, at this exact point in the practice. If metta were a feeling, the instruction would be cruel. You cannot force yourself to feel warmth towards someone who has harmed you. The heart does not obey commands. But metta is not a feeling. It is an orientation, a decision. And a decision can be made even when the heart is screaming no. The Buddha did not say, "This is easy." He said, "It is worth it." And he gave a reason, not a sentimental reason, not a spiritual platitude, but a precise, almost clinical observation about what anger does to the person who carries it. In the Ṭhānissaro Sutta, AN 760, the Buddha listed 7 outcomes of anger, 7 things that happen to the angry person, not to the person they are angry at. When you are consumed by anger, he said, you become ugly, you sleep badly, you lose profit where you should have gained it, you lose wealth you have already accumulated, you lose your reputation, you lose your friends, and you set the conditions for rebirth in a lower realm. Then the Buddha made a statement that is among the most psychologically precise in the entire canon. By acting under the power of anger, you are doing precisely what your enemy would like you to do. Sit with that for a moment. The person who harmed you, if they wished you further harm, could not design a better weapon than your own anger. Your anger is not hurting them. They may not even know you are angry. They may have forgotten what they did. They may be sleeping easily tonight while you replay the conversation for the 100th time. Your anger is a fire that burns only the house it is lit in. And the Buddha's point is not that you should suppress it. His point is that you should see it clearly. See what it is doing, to whom, and at whose expense, and then choose differently, not for their sake, for the freedom of your own mind. There is a story in the canon that makes this point with a vividness that no abstract teaching can match. A Brahmin named Akkosaka, the name itself means the insulter, arrived at the place where the Buddha was staying. He was furious. He had heard that one of his relatives had ordained under the Buddha, and he came to confront the teacher. He insulted the Buddha. He cursed him. He berated him publicly, using every term of abuse available to him. SN 7:2. The Buddha listened, and then he asked a question. Do friends and colleagues come to visit you as guests? Akkosaka, caught off guard, said, Yes, sometimes they do. And do you serve them foods and delicacies? Yes, I do. And if they do not accept your food, if they leave without eating, to whom does the food belong? Well, if they do not accept it, the food is still mine. In the same way, Brahman, that with which you have insulted me, who is not insulting, that with which you have taunted me, who is not taunting, that with which you have berated me, who is not berating, I do not accept it from you. It is all yours, Brahman. It is all yours. The Buddha did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not return the insult or escalate the confrontation. He simply declined to pick up what was being offered. The anger remained with the person who brought it, untouched, unreceived, undiminished. And the verse that follows is among the most practical in the canon. You live for the good of both, your own, the others. When knowing the other is provoked, you mindfully grow calm, both, your own good and theirs. Not because you owe them goodwill, but because you're calm, your refusal to pick up the coal is itself an act of metta, toward yourself first, and then, almost as a side effect, toward them. Because Akkosaka, confronted with a mind he could not provoke, did something no one expected. He took refuge. He ordained. He eventually became an arahant, fully liberated. The man who came to curse the Buddha became the Buddha's student, not because the Buddha loved him, because the Buddha maintained goodwill, intact, undisturbed, immeasurable. And Akkosaka eventually saw something in that steadiness that changed his life. Now, there is a famous image often attributed to the Buddha. You may have heard it. Anger, the saying goes, is like holding a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone. You are the one who gets burned. The image is vivid, it is memorable, and it does not come from the suttas. It comes from Buddhaghosa's Visuddhimagga, the same 5th century commentary that gave us the graduated sequence and the neutral being. The popular version was further shaped by Joan Borisenko in 1987 and has since been misattributed to the Buddha across thousands of books, websites, and meditation classes. We mention this not because the image is wrong. The principle it expresses is thoroughly canonical. We mention it because the canonical teachings offer something even better: 7 specific reasons why anger serves your enemy and harms you. AN 760. And the story of a man who tried to insult the Buddha and walked away having found liberation. SN 72. The original sources are richer, more precise, and more useful than the paraphrase that replaced them. And there is one more canonical statement on this subject. The most extreme statement the Buddha ever made about maintaining goodwill toward those who harm you. In the Kakakupama Sutta, MN 21, the Buddha said, "Even if bandits were to carve you up savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw, if you harbored any ill will toward them, you would not be carrying out his teaching. Beginning with them," he said, "we will keep pervading the all-encompassing world with an awareness imbued with goodwill, beginning with them, not eventually getting around to them after you have processed your feelings, not when you are ready, beginning with them." The people holding the saw. Most of us will never face bandits with a saw, but we will face the colleague who took credit for our work, the friend who betrayed a confidence, the family member who left without explanation and never came back, the parent who should have protected us and did not. The Buddha's instruction applies to all of them, not because they deserve our goodwill, they may not, but because we deserve the freedom that comes from not carrying the weight of what they did. The practice of metta toward the difficult person is not for their benefit, not initially. It is the refusal to let their actions determine the orientation of your mind. It is the choice to remain free, even in the presence of those who harmed you. Act 4. The Mother Simile. The practice of metta toward the difficult person is not, initially, for them. It is for the freedom of your own mind. But once that freedom is established, once the mind can hold goodwill steady even in the presence of those who have caused harm, something else becomes possible. Goodwill stops being a discipline. It becomes a way of seeing. And the Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta offers an image for this, one of the most famous in all of Buddhist literature, and one of the most misunderstood. As a mother would risk her life to protect her child, her only child, even so should one cultivate the heart limitlessly with regard to all beings. SN 1:8. This is sometimes read as, "Cherish all beings the way a mother cherishes her child. Love them with that same fierce tenderness. Hold them with that same desperate protectiveness." But that is not what the sutta says. Ṭhānissaro points out that the parallel is not between the child and all beings. It is between protecting the child and protecting your goodwill. A mother does not measure whether the child deserves protection. She does not calculate the costs. She protects instinctively, completely, without negotiation. In the same way, you protect your goodwill toward all beings. Not because every being has earned it, not because every being is lovable, but because this orientation of mind, once established, once trained, once made strong, is worth protecting the way a mother protects her only child. The goodwill is the child, not the beings, the goodwill. This reframe matters because it answers the question that haunts every practitioner who takes the difficult person practice seriously. What if they do not deserve my goodwill? What if my goodwill changes nothing? What if I extend metta to someone who will go on causing harm regardless? The answer is, you are not protecting them. You are protecting the quality of your own mind. And that quality, that orientation toward the well-being of all, is precious. It is hard-won. It deserves the same fierce protectiveness that a mother gives her child. Metta is the foundation, but it is not alone. The Buddha taught 4 sublime attitudes, the brahmavihārās. Metta is the first. The second is karuna, compassion. This is what goodwill feels when it encounters suffering. It does not turn away. It wants the suffering to stop. The third is mudita, empathetic joy. This is what goodwill feels when it encounters happiness. It does not envy. It wants the happiness to continue. And the fourth is upekkha, equanimity. Ṭhānissaro frames equanimity as the aid and the check on the other three. Equanimity is not indifference. It is not the cold shoulder you turn to a world you have given up on. It is the stability that makes goodwill sustainable. When you cannot stop someone's suffering, no matter how hard you try, when the person you wish well continues to make choices that lead to harm, equanimity keeps you from adding more suffering to the situation through your own frustration, your own grief, your own need to fix what is not yours to fix. It focuses what goodwill can actually do. Ṭhānissaro puts it simply, the four sublime attitudes are actually contained in two, goodwill and equanimity. Everything else flows between them, and there is one more teaching that places metta in its proper context, not as a standalone practice, but as the flower of a purified mind. In the Vatthapama Sutta, the cloth simile, the Buddha compared the mind to a piece of cloth, MN7. A dirty cloth takes dye poorly. A clean cloth takes it well. In the same way, a mind full of defilements, possessiveness, ill will, anger, deceit, arrogance, the full list of 16, takes the teaching poorly. The monk first abandons these defilements one by one. Then comes confirmed conviction, then joy, then rapture, then calm, then pleasure, then concentration. And only then, after this entire sequence of purification, does the sutta describe the brahmavihāra practice. The directional radiation of goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. Metta is the culmination, not the substitute. It blooms from practice, from the slow, unglamorous work of cleaning the cloth. And when it is combined with insight, when you see clearly what is impermanent, what is stressful, what is not self, the metta becomes something the canon calls metta cettavimutti, the awareness release through goodwill, a specific meditative attainment, a mind released, not by suppression, not by escape, but by the fullness of goodwill extended without limit, combined with the clarity of wisdom that sees things as they are. The Karaṇīya Mettā Sutta ends with this: whether standing, walking, sitting, or lying down, as long as one has banished torpor, one should be determined on this mindfulness. This is called a Brahma abiding here, not after death, not on retreat, not in some future life when conditions are better. Here, in this body, in this posture, standing, walking, sitting, lying down. The orientation of the mind toward the well-being of all beings, maintained through all activities, all encounters, all moods, all days, all. May all beings be happy at heart, weak or strong, long or short, seen or unseen, near or far. The stranger you will never meet, the person who has harmed you, the one you pass every day and never see. All of them, without exception, without limit. This is metta. This is goodwill.